Dear speakers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome you today to our workshop on multi-level governance and active subsidiarity for sustainable recovery and resilience. And I hope you are as impressed as I am that the organizers were able to include all the most relevant catchwords of European policy into one single title. My name is Mark Speich. I'm the chairman of the CIVEX Commission of the European Committee of the Regions, and I have the great honor to represent North Rhine-Westphalia, the most populous state in Germany, in the Committee of the Regions. This workshop is co-organized by the European Committee of the Regions and the Conference of Regional Legislative Assemblies of the EU. And as Europe is all about acronyms, the acronym here is CALRE. And I'm delighted we are joined by CALRE members who will share with us their views on the role of EU regional legislative assemblies. I have the pleasure of chairing the discussion of our first panel, entitled Trade-offs between strong regional powers, leadership, and multi-level governance in the recovery agenda. As part of this panel, we will hear from Madame Simona Piattoni, a professor of university at the University of Trento in Italy, Mr. Serafin Passos Vidal, author of a book on subsidiarity and EU multi-level governance, actors, networks, and agendas, and from Madame Dorothée Allain-Dupré, who is joining us from the OECD, where she heads the Directorate for Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance Division Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. The debate will further benefit from the insights of Mr. Karl-Heinz Lamberts, who is President of the Parliament of the German-speaking Community of Belgium and a member of the Committee of the Regions, where he was also the President. Ms. Francesca Campolongo from the European Commission Joint Research Service, and from Mr. Clemens Sumer from the European Parliamentary Research Service. All of those have kindly recorded messages for us, which we will play for you. The second panel, which looks at assessing the functioning of multi-level governance in the context of the recovery and resilience agenda, in the context of the perspectives of EU regional legislative assemblies, will be chaired by my colleague, Ms. Antje Grother, who is Vice President of the Bremen State Parliament and a member of our CIVEX Commission in the Committee of the Regions. Before we start, let's go through some good practices in Zoom. I mean, most of you will be acquainted with that, and I ask the organizers to put up the slide. So you can see participant windows to view all other attendees. You see the interpretation windows, the chat window to ask questions. That's especially important because that's your opportunity to take part in that discussion. And if you would like to ask a question, as you can read, type your question in the chat window and write the name of the panelist that you would like to address with your question. And of course, time may not allow all questions to be addressed. We have a very tight schedule today. And as I said, we have a full program ahead of us. So without further ado, I would like to open the debate in the first panel with a video that was provided by Mr. Karl-Heinz Lamberts, who is, as I said, a former president of the European Committee of the Regions, a former member of the Task Force on Subsidiarity and Proportionality, and the current chair of our Subsidiarity Steering Group, and the president of the Parliament of the German-speaking Community of Belgium. And without, as I said, further ado, I would like to play the video right now.
Liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, das Subsidiaritätsprinzip gehört zur DNA der Europäischen Union. Es ist ein Wort, ein Konzept, ein Begriff. Und wir müssen diesem Konzept konkreten Inhalt verleihen. Das muss beim Aufbau der EU-Institutionen geschehen. Da ist es wichtig, dass alle Ebenen von der europäischen über die nationale bis zu der regionalen und lokalen richtig eingebaut sind. Und da haben ganz besonders die Regionen mit Gesetzgebungshoheit eine bedeutende Rolle zu spielen. Subsidiarität gilt aber auch für die Erarbeitung der EU-Gesetzgebung. Wann soll die EU etwas regeln und vor allem, welche Regeldichte soll dabei herrschen? Muss jedes Detail wirklich in einer EU-Bestimmung stehen? Natürlich nicht. Und schließlich kommt es auch bei der praktischen Umsetzung der EU-Politik auf die korrekte Anwendung des Subsidiaritätsprinzips an. Bei den Strukturfonds, bei dem Wiederaufbauplan, beim Klimaplan, überall muss dafür Sorge getragen werden, dass dem Subsidiaritätsprinzip und vor allem auch der Rolle der regionalen Ebene die nötige Bedeutung beigemessen wird. Ja, gelebte Subsidiarität, das ist vor allem Dialog auf Augenhöhe und vor allem auch ein ergebnisorientiertes Arbeiten unter Berücksichtigung der Regeln der Multilevel Governance. Die Taskforce Subsidiarität hat 2018 wichtige Vorarbeit geleistet. In ihrem Bericht steht vieles, was auch heute noch von allergrößter Aktualität ist. Und ich freue mich, dass man auch immer wieder in den Dokumenten der 2019 eingesetzten EU-Kommission Bezüge auf diese Arbeit findet. Wichtig war auch, dass der Ausschuss der Regionen die Regional Hubs geschaffen hat und dadurch bewiesen hat, dass man Subsidiarität auch in ganz konkreten Politikbereichen gestalten und aufarbeiten kann. Diese Arbeit ist jetzt in das Programm Fit for Europe eingeflossen und das ist eine wichtige Entscheidung. Auch die Regionen mit Gesetzgebungshoheit können noch besser eingebaut werden. Gerade diese Regionen spielen eine besonders wichtige Rolle, wenn man es mit dem Subsidiaritätsprinzip wirklich ernst meint. Da darf es nicht nur darum gehen, mit irgendwelchen Karten herumzuwedeln. Da geht es vor allem darum, und dazu bedarf es noch vieler Anstrengungen, dass vor dem Hinterlegen von Entwürfen seitens der EU-Kommission richtiger Dialog und richtige Einbindung der Regionen stattfindet. Und dabei geht es auch darum, dass in der Schlussphase der Entscheidungsfindung, nämlich dann, wenn im Trilog die Würfel fallen, dass auch da ein Mitspracherecht zustande kommt. Wir brauchen diese fruchtbare Wechselbeziehung zwischen der europäischen und der regionalen Ebene. Wenn man in Europa etwas ausdenkt, muss man schon von vornherein mit berücksichtigen, wie das dann in der regionalen Vielfalt Europas umsetzbar ist. Und wenn man Prioritäten in Europa festlegt, ist man gut beraten, mit den Dingen Rechnung zu tragen, die den Regionen vor Ort als besonders bedeutungsvoll erscheinen. Nur so können wir die Europäische Union nachhaltig in die Köpfe und Herzen der Menschen vor Ort, da wo sie leben, verankern. Da und nur da entscheidet sich letztlich, ob für die Bürgerinnen und Bürger Europas die Europäische Union einen wirklichen Mehrwert hat. Und das ist die eigentliche, die grundsätzliche Bedeutung des Subsidiaritätsprinzips.
So let me thank Karl-Heinz Lamberts for this very important contribution. And with that, I would like now to turn to our distinguished speakers to launch the debate of this workshop. You have all followed and witnessed during the COVID-19 health crisis that local and regional authorities have been at the front line of actions. Clearly, some regions and cities have more involvement than others due to their competences and their constitutional powers. Cities and regions also have been in the front line of social and economic recovery measures. In some cases, regions and cities have made full use of their competences. In other cases, we have seen tendencies to a centralization of response measures, which may have put the principle of subsidiarity into question. Many of you have also underlined in your research how important multi-level governance structures and cooperation between levels of government is in a crisis management and recovery architecture. What would be your initial thoughts about multi-level governance and active subsidiarity in relation to the challenges of a sustainable recovery and achieving resilience? As first, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Simona Piattoni, who is professor of political science at the Department of Sociology and Social Research at the University of Trento in Italy. And she has written very extensively on this topic. I would like her now to share with us her insights. You have the floor, well, let's say for about 3 to 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speich. Thank you for the invitation. Time is very short, so let me get down immediately to my, few initial ideas. First of all, I am basing myself more on the documents looking forward to the implementation of the national recovery and resilience plans rather than to the period of the COVID emergency, when indeed regions were brought in several countries to share, ideas, strategies, ways of tackling with the emergency. But what in many ways concerns me most is where we go from there. Let's say that the emergency period is over. So how does the recovery and resilience facility and the various plans bring in regions and local authorities in the implementation of these plans? Now, of course, these plans were supposed to be drafted by consulting extensively with regional and local authorities. However, as far as I can see from the first few plans already approved, this was not uniformly the case. Regions, rather than being consulted in the ideational phase when the plans were drafted, seem to appear in these documents more at the implementation phase, which is a bit, of course, is important, but is a bit of a danger, because if the regions and the local authorities are not involved early on, they might also not really share the ideas, the guiding principles of these plans, and so implementation could also be affected. For example, in the field of the digital agenda, the emphasis is mostly on infrastructural investment, less on gearing up the effective utilization of this new digital infrastructure. And discouragingly little attention, with some exceptions, is devoted to making sure that these new tools can be competently used by citizens and local administrators. This is the issue of literacy. And also, as far as the green agenda is concerned, the opportunity to link up with cohesion policy, which has a strong green agenda within it, has been somewhat forsaken. So the impression is that the member states have submitted these plans having more in mind the physical investment aspect rather than the human, cultural, territorially distinct, and I would say even immaterial capital linked to the epochal transformation that our economies and societies are undergoing because of the pandemic and all that followed. This may be due to expediency, short time, particularly short time for the implementation. And so, centralization is the first reaction, but I think it also betrays a shift in the understanding of what structural means that has been going on at least since the new Stability and Growth Pact and since the launch of the European semester. Because while once structural was associated with funds and recall the place-based approach to cohesion, it is now attached to reforms aimed at making entire national productive systems more competitive, and hence indicates an attention to the factors of production, labor, capital, knowledge, markets, wherever they happen to be, rather than to places. This, I think that this shift from place to location, wherever that location is a bit worrying. Now, I don't know how much time I still have, but if I may, I would raise a second issue, that is the insufficient linkage between recovery and resilience plans and cohesion policy. Now, there is the opportunity and also the clear overlap between between these two programs. But the local and regional authorities run the risk of being distracted from the much more detailed and demanding management of the operational programs linked to cohesion policy, and their attention diverted to the quick implementation of the national recovery and resilience plans. There is also a notable slack in the progress in which the notion of partnership has been interpreted. Now, let me get for 1 second to subsidiarity. We know that subsidiarity has been defined in at least two quite different ways, right? One, putting the emphasis on member states rather than European institutions, where as the place at which certain decisions and certain legislation should be made. And the other one, putting the emphasis on citizens and putting the decisions as close as possible to the citizens, therefore also local and regional authorities. Now, none of these two definitions has absolutely won prominence or has been declared the definition of subsidiarity. But let me point to one thing, that the effort to legalize this concept, as if by introducing in EU legislation a little chapter, a little paragraph on whether the piece of legislation breaches or does not breach the principle of subsidiarity, is missing completely the point. I couldn't agree more with Mr. Lambert. Subsidiarity is not a legal concept. It is a political and democratic concept. Subsidiarity means that the representatives of citizens at different levels of aggregation, therefore potentially with different ideas, supranational, national, regional, local, associational, and even functional, must be consulted. Now, I think I have used up my time, so perhaps in the question and answers I can come back on the potential impact that strong regional powers and leadership may have on the governance and the recovery agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Piattoni, for this very concise contribution, and on the one hand showing that, well, the term structural is in a deep change, and I think that's really something especially the regions and local authorities have to rethink what that means in consequence for them. And second, also for reminding us that subsidiarity, in fact, is a democratic, a political concept, and we have to implement it as a political concept. I think that is that has been an extremely important hint, and of course we would like to go deeper into that in the Q&A session. And now I would like to play a video message from the European Commission Joint Research Center, namely from Ms. Francesca Campolongo. She is Deputy Director of the Growth and Innovation Directorate and the head of the Finance and Economy Unit at the JRC. Please play the video.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start by thanking the Committee of the Regions and the EU Assembly of Regional and Local Representatives and all the organizers of this fantastic European Week of Regions and Cities for giving the opportunity to the JRC to give its perspective on such an important topic. My main message today is that we cannot miss this opportunity. The recovery effort is not just a way to get back where we were before. It is an opportunity to bounce forward, to help society perform at full potential, but also to navigate the green and digital transition and accomplish the long-term objectives of societal, environmental, and economic sustainability. Such transformation cannot be imposed from above. It's not only a task for European institutions nor national governments. Yes, the money and the policy drive is essential, but it's not sufficient. We at the JRC have been working with European countries and regions to support the implementation of cohesion policy since 2012. And to make the best out of the European funds, our focus is place-based innovation, what we call smart specialization. And what we have found these years is that you need to understand and support a complex process of collaboration among different levels of government and stakeholders, science, policy, industry, and society, to be able to define and to implement effective territorial policies. There is no ready-made formula. Each place needs to learn, negotiate, and agree specific governance structures. And at the JRC, we have developed methodological support for this experimental, emergent, and participatory process that we are piloting with the European Committee of the Regions, which also involves updating smart specialization strategies with a stronger focus on sustainability. That is our evidence-based approach to create local jobs in the new green and digital economy, to increase the return of this unprecedented EU investment for recovery, and to support the transition into a sustainable economy. Thank you all. I wish you a very fruitful and interesting workshop.
Thank you very much for this contribution, and I would like now to invite Mr. Serafin Pazos Vidal, who is the author of the book entitled Subsidiarity and EU Multi-Level Governance, Actors, Networks and Agendas, to react to that video message and tell us how he sees the principles of multi-level governance and active subsidiarity in the context for sustainable recovery and resilience. Mr. Pazos Vidal, you have the floor again for 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to be brief. I'm great to be in this great company, and I very much like to speak just after Professor Piatton, author I read many times in my academic career as well. And perhaps my invitation today is more to provide a bit more practical perspective, as I've been for many years member of the COR Subsidiarity Expert Group and many other roles in the political work of COR and in the practical issues about how regions operate with the EU. We are in a critical juncture because on the one hand, we have the Conference of the Future of Europe, so basically a new beginning or new reflection where we are as the European Union. At the same time, COVID has resulted in a Copernican change in the way EU allocates funds, and therefore the politics that generate out of that are significantly different to what was only thought possible a couple of years ago. As mentioned already by Professor Piatton, of course, we have a conflict on terms when it comes to subsidiarity. I mean, it's actually quite good to actually have this opportunity to actually think the philosophical boundaries of the EU and the way it interacts with the national, subnational level, and also the operational part, which is what Next Generation EU provides us a rethink. But as I say, as mentioned, I mean, the problem or the question is that if you ask the Commission to simplify what subsidiarity means, it's an efficiency concept. If you ask the COR and the members of the COR and those who work for them, like myself, they would say it's a proximity, it's a concept. And I think and we have had this inherent question since the Maastricht Treaty, and certainly with Amsterdam and then Lisbon with the early warning system and all the provisions of subsidiarity were added to that. But we are still on that, and that's why it was quite helpful the kind of the position that was agreed in the Subsidiarity Task Force in 2018, and this comes to active subsidiarity, because as President Lamberts mentioned, it's a political concept, but has a concept that has legal consequences. And active subsidiarity essentially trying to marry the philosophical and operational nature of the concept, and trying to find the efficiency side. Decisions should be taken where it's more efficient, to the proximity, decisions should be taken to the closest to the system. So it's like with many things, a political construct that's trying to actually marry this philosophical difference that there is. Now, it's been said that the time of the Europe of regions is well past its heyday, but Europe has not forgotten the regions, and that's why certainly after the last big economic crisis, 2008, sorry, the European semester had a lot of structural reforms that implicitly needed the regions. And as the COR has said many times, they were not properly reflected and respected in their national plans on the structural reforms of the European semester. Only recently, and no measure by the COR own contribution as number of political representations and studies about the need for a code of conduct for essentially the partnership principle to be applied to the European semester. There's now the so-called Annex D since 2019, which is for the first time trying to address more or less directly or specifically the subnational aspects of and territorial aspects of structural reforms, which is not just development, it's actual structural reforms, sometimes in what is essentially domestic policies, nothing to do with the EU. And that is, I think, is a breakthrough, the more so as the Annex D are the basis both of the EU funding programs 21-27, the classic ones, the structural funds in particular, but also the recovery plans that were created with the Next Generation EU. Just a brief mention of Next Generation EU. I mean, to simplify, Next Generation EU, apart from the fact that it's financed through debt, which is a Copernican shifting itself, it is both a possibility and a problem, because it doesn't have the notion of partnership that we are used to in cohesion policy for over several decades. It is a bit like the former cohesion fund that still applies to some countries, like a national fund, which is geared to be centralized. And the provisions that are in the regulations and the way, as Professor Pedro mentioned, and the comparative research already exists, is not territorial. When it's territorial? When there's no need, there's no other way of doing that. For instance, in Spain, which is a program I know very well and I've done significant research on, it was originally supposed to be very centralized, but in practice has to be rather territorialized. Why? Because the politics of Spain and the institutional arrangements force you to do that. Likely it or not, even if it's more efficient, less efficient. Whereas, interestingly enough, some federal states have gone to a very more centralized approach that you will expect. And that will generate tensions. The more so as you will have part of EU policies delivering a partnership principle and others don't. But I mean, I would say that with a certain grain of salt, because a number of studies we have carried out over the years shows that, you know, partnership principle exists in cohesion policy only if there is a culture of partnership already in the member states. If there's not, it's much more difficult that it exists. I mean, there's a clear correlation between domestic interinstitutional arrangements, central local or central regional arrangements, and how that apply also to the European funds. I think the Next Generation EU has been a bit of a missed opportunity. I mean, when this was created, was thought to be a bit of the structural reform program, which is this program that was created in 2018 to do structural reforms to support the European semester. So, okay, well, now we're going to have much more money to actually do these deep-seated reforms that the states, regions, and local authorities are unable to do on their own. In reality, if one look at the nature of the programs that are being approved by the EU in terms of the national reform programs of Next Generation EU, you see that it's mostly budget support. It's not sometimes it's not even really structural policy. It's just budget support to actually put money into the economy. And there's a lot of structural reforms that are just basically put there, but not necessarily connected with investments, not necessarily connected with the actual needs of changing the structures. There's not like a clear link, as we hoped they would be the case. Even, for instance, an anecdotal case, Spain is going to dedicate only 5% to structural reforms, whereas Germany, which perhaps a country which is a bit better off, is going to devote to 10%, but still it's not the main part of the investments. So I think there is a lot of things to develop to conclude. I think the COFOE, the Conference Future of Europe, has an opportunity for highlighting the territorial dimension, to better embed some principles that are already in the treaties, and perhaps relooking at some of them. New concepts that territorial impact assessment, rural proofing, which has been approved like last July, the new concept, the new urban agenda. There is many existing tools that can actually support active subsidiarity. But I think we need a more joined up approach, and perhaps now is the moment to actually by this happy coincidence about the Conflict Future of Europe and the whole discussion on the recovery programs, to have that discussion. Thank you.
I'm very sorry. I think there was a problem with the mic. So now I should be heard. So let me thank you once again, Mr. Passos-Vidal, for your contribution. And thank you for trying to marry the philosophical approach to subsidiarity with a more practical one. Before I turn now to our next speaker, I would like to remind all participants that they can pose questions in the chat. So that would be fantastic. And having said that, I would like now to give the floor to Madame Dorothée Allon-Dupré, who joins us from the OECD, where she is the head of regional development and the multi-level governance division center for entrepreneurship, SMEs, regions, and cities. Madame Allon-Dupré, you have the floor for 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very much to the Committee of the Region for organizing this very interesting discussion and for inviting me. So I will provide some insights of what we have learned so far for multi-level governance for the crisis management and the recovery. I will focus on the OECD perspective, so beyond Europe. So the good news is that the recovery is on track. The last OECD economic outlook released last month highlights that the economic recovery remains strong and global GDP has now risen above its pre-pandemic level. However, the recovery is very uneven across countries, but also within countries. And within countries, the recovery is uneven in part because not all places were equally prepared to face the crisis. Not all places were impacted in the same way. And not all places have the same capacity to recover. And for some regions will be impacted in a very long term probably. So if we just take the example of vaccination, we can also see important disparities in vaccination today and territorial divides within countries, and in particular sometimes between urban and rural areas. So there are different reasons for this: the difficult access to health services, but also the mistrust sometimes in government and in health authorities. So this is linked to the debate around the geography of discontent, with important urban-rural divides in trust in government in some countries, which can have serious implications for the functioning of democracies. So what does this imply for the recovery strategy and for multi-level governance? To manage the uneven impact of the crisis and its recovery and to tackle this discontent, it is crucial to develop effective place-based policies that target the region-specific factors behind persisting regional disparities. And this has important implications for the multi-level governance system. It means two concrete things. The first is that we need to reinforce multi-level governance system, notably by clarifying the mandates assigned to regional and local government and ensuring sufficient fiscal space to operate. The second is that it requires focusing on coordination and partnerships approach vertically between national and subnational government, but also horizontally across a jurisdiction. On this point of coordination, we know that this has been a very important challenge in many countries in 2020. In a joint survey that we conducted with the Committee of the Region last year in summer 2020, we saw that for 71% of EU subnational governments surveyed, they reported that there has been a lack of coordination, and that has been among the biggest challenges that they have faced in managing the crisis. The lack of technical means and equipment and financial resources was also reported as a major challenge by almost 80% of respondents. So during the crisis, it has been evident that coordination among levels of government was really crucial to minimize crisis management failures. And this has been true in all countries, whether highly centralized, highly decentralized. In federal context, we have seen some important failures in the crisis management. But coordination is also critical for the success of recovery strategy. And in this survey that we did, the number one measure that came out as the number one contributor to the successful exit strategy was the adoption of a coordinated approach among all levels of government when designing and implementing a recovery measure. It was identified by 90% of respondents. So what we observed is that the crisis and the recovery have led countries to reevaluate multi-level governance system in an effort to make them more fit for purpose, more flexible, and better able to respond to the differentiated needs of regions. For example, there are debates around decentralization in countries like France, Italy, Japan, or Chile, to quote a few examples. And this coordination is particularly critical for the climate agenda. We know that the climate priorities are among the top priorities in recovery plans all around OECD countries. And we also know that subnational governments, they are responsible for 64% of public investment linked to climate and environment objectives in the OECD. So any credible national recovery strategy focusing on climate should properly involve subnational government. Let me just conclude with a keyword, opportunity. The challenges posed by the COVID-19 may be turned into opportunities to build more resilient multi-level governance systems. So this requires, in particular, rethinking multi-level governance systems and source of financing for subnational government, bringing more clarity in the assignment of responsibilities to limit the number of gray areas, which has been particularly problematic in managing the health, but also the economic crisis, and clarifying the role assigned to regional authorities, which have the proper scale to address some of the challenges linked to the recovery and to megatrends. The third priority is to capitalize on the role of subnational government to strengthen trust with citizens, since subnational governments are closer to citizens and trust is often higher at that level. And the last one is on strengthening, of course, institutional and fiscal coordination across levels of government. So just to conclude, I just would like to mention that at the OECD, in order to support this agenda, we will soon launch the OECD Regional Recovery Platform, a platform that compiles internationally comparable data on the COVID-19 crisis and the recovery and the resilience of regions. So we look forward to continuing working with the Committee of the Regions on this very important agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madame Alain-Dupré, and also for sharing the expertise of the OECD with us. And of course, we are also looking forward to the new platform that could be a powerful resource for our future work in the Committee of the Regions. Thank you very much. I would like to conclude this panel with a message from Mr. Clement Sumar, head of Linking the Levels Unit of the European Parliamentary Research Service. So please play the video.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, hello. My name is Clement Sumar and I work in the European Parliamentary Research Service. It is great to be part of this workshop organized by two of our key partners, the European Committee of the Regions and regions with legislative powers organized in CADRE. Indeed, the role of the European Parliament is becoming ever more complex. Also, the role of European regions is becoming ever more complex. Well, this was true even before coronavirus, but now it's more relevant than ever. For sustainable recovery and building resilience, we must work together. This is why in the European Parliament, we are building links with you who live and work in and for your communities, in your regions and cities across the EU. During the pandemic, regional and local actors have shown an ability and will to deliver fast and flexible responses, to innovate and cooperate across regional and national borders. There are plenty of good examples. They extend to the key EU priorities, such as the green and digital transition. On the EU's ambitious recovery and resilience plan, where unprecedented amount of money is available for good projects, all levels of governance share the responsibility to deliver for the people across the EU. In the EPRS, the European Parliament think tank, we systematically extract, analyze, and present key info on EU policy. This way, we empower members of the European Parliament to make better laws. We can help your work and empower you as well. How? For instance, we have been covering in detail the new multi-annual budget and the recovery plan for Europe. Our briefings, infographics, and podcasts prepared for MEPs provide quick quality insights on EU policy. And from the feedback you give us, we are happy this, which is publicly available, is also useful for you. On the topic of today, for example, there is an EU financing for 2021 to 2027 infographics that we have prepared. We have been following closely the recovery and resilience facility, and we are constantly updating the recovery plan for Europe. This is the version for this month. I invite you to have a look. Because this is so important, we have also created a team that monitors Next Generation EU. My own team, which we call Linking the Levels, gathers input of governmental organizations across the EU. When drafting legislation, European Parliament members want to take into account your positions, your concerns, knowledge, and experience from the local and regional levels. You too can be involved. Building lasting partnerships with the Committee of Regions and CADRE is essential to make sure that our system of multi-level governance works well. If you work for governmental organizations and want to engage with us, you may actually want to set up a meeting now with Claudio Colova, who is attending the workshop. Or contact us via any of the channels shown at the end of this video. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the workshop.
Thank you very much. And I would not only thank for the contribution, but also for the invitation to get into contact. And I can only encourage the participants to do that and to use the resources that were offered here. Thank you very much. We now would like to turn to the audience with a Slido question, and you find the instructions on using Slido in the chat. I would like now to read out the questions that can be answered via the Slido system. You also see the QR code on the screen. So the question is, which one of the below is, in your view, the key to a sustainable recovery? A centralized approach where the higher level of government assumes responsibility for efficiency and the involvement of partners. B, a decentralized approach based on the strict application of subsidiarity, giving the subnational level the competences to have a direct say in the national recovery and resilience plans. C, a partnership approach as an expression of active subsidiarity characterized by involving the subnational level while keeping the current framework of competences. So it's already running, and well, and I think there is a clear tendency, which maybe is not that surprising. So I'm now going to close the participation while it's still running. You can see few participants are having a huge impact on the result. But I think the result is now quite clear. So a large majority is in favor of a partnership approach as an expression of active subsidiarity. That's what I probably would have expected. Thank you very much for that. And now we are really brutally running out of time. So I would give our panelists at least one question each. And I would like to start in reverse order. And I would like to ask Madame Alain Dupré, have the OECD countries outside Europe had a similar multi-level governance challenge during the crisis? And what are the main lessons that can be taken from those experiences? I mean, you already alluded a little bit to that in your contribution, but it would be interesting to hear that. Before I give you the floor, I just want to give our two other panelists a joint question, if you like, and that is, in the context of the Conference of the Future of Europe, what new mechanisms or tools could be imagined for an enforcement of the subsidiarity principle? So that will be the question I will pose both to Mr. Serafin Passos Vidal and Professor Piattoni. It would be great if you could answer those questions very precise in a minute. I'm sorry for that, but as we are running out of time, we have to be that precise. Thank you very much. And now the floor is to Ms. Alain Dupré.
Thank you very much. I will try to be very quick. So yes, indeed. I mean, this debate on multi-level governance goes well beyond Europe. I mean, all countries basically around the world managing the crisis have had to some extent some important debates on this question, since some national governments have been at the front line in all countries. In federal countries, there have been in the US, in Australia, in Canada, really important debates on how the federal system is working with, for example, a complete lack of coordination across states, even today, when we see the vaccination strategy in Australia, for example, which is creating important problems in the recovery, but also in unitary countries like Japan and Chile, Korea, for example, in which they also want to revisit a bit the functioning of decentralization and maybe to do some reforms in those dimensions. So this debate on multi-level governance is really at the center of the recovery. It will probably take time, of course, to make some serious reforms to improve the systems. But I would say that in all countries, the debate focused on the coordination dimension and on the clarification of the responsibilities assigned to some national government, and in particular to the regional level. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so concise in your reply. I would now turn to Mr. Passos Vidal with the question I already posed. So what kind of new mechanisms or tools could you imagine for an enforcement of subsidiarity within the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe? The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Very briefly, I mean, quite clearly, I mean, it's so far unlikely there's going to be a new treaty change, but if there were a treaty change, there could be a few things to optimize. I mean, I don't think, I was part of the European Convention 20 years ago. I don't think the debate has moved significantly beyond that, but there are things that could be included there. For instance, if the semester is going to be applied to the national authorities and structural reforms and the fiscal treaties, that has to be recognized in any treaty in the future. The better regulation, there are other things that that will help. I mean, but a lot of that is actually things that we already have. Like we have new better regulation guidelines with a fit for future platform. We got a new revised subsidiarity tool. So these are things that actually need to be used. I mean, we've spent years calling for them. Now we actually make better use of them. But there's still, for instance, if there is treaty reform, there is perhaps some elements of what is now in the better regulation guidelines or the urban agenda, the rural proofing proposals that I mentioned earlier, and to make some recognition of that in the treaties, the same way that, you know, the partnership principle is something that could be added to the treaty reform. But a lot of that, you know, if we don't get to a treaty reform, there is already a lot of these tools already in place. We actually need to make better use of them and make them work together with each other rather than just separate initiatives. And in that, I have to say that a lot of proactive work that COR has been doing in terms of actually formulating these impact assessments and these studies about evaluating the semester have been actually helpful to actually advance the agenda. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And with the same question, I would like now to turn to Professor Piattoni. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, the Conference on the Future of Europe is already a giant experiment with many opportunities for participation, deliberation, and it's quite innovative in its own right. Now, how could we enforce subsidiarity within the Conference on the Future of Europe? Well, first of all, I think number one, by taking seriously the suggestions that may come from regional representatives, regional associations, but also associations of citizens at various levels. So if that experiment takes seriously the suggestions and includes them into what will move the European Union going forward, that is already a very important message. The second thing I would emphasize is that this involvement will be all the more credible the more the regions and local authorities themselves use these participatory and deliberative tools at home. Because yes, we say that regional and local authorities are closer to the citizens, but hey, it's not uniformly like that, in the sense that more meaning could be infused and more substance could be infused into this concept. So regional and local authorities should take themselves seriously as being close to citizens, and then demand that also in the many ways that Mr. Pazos Vidal already mentioned, those are integrated also into a new treaty or in the European semester or the Next Generation EU.
Thank you very much, and I really would like to thank all our speakers for their contributions. I apologize for the very rigid time management. All your contributions would have deserved to be discussed in a week-long seminar. Alas, we don't have that time today, and I'm very sorry for that. Now I would like to give the floor and to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Antje Grother, who will welcome our CALRE members to another very interesting debate. And once again, I apologize that we couldn't go deeper into what we've just heard. Thank you very much. And having said that, the floor is yours, Antje Grother.
Thank you, Mr. Speich. Maybe it is a good idea to continue this conversation and this discussion on a later possibility during or with our Civics Commission or anything like that. Thank you all for being here today. It is my privilege to be with you to moderate the panel on assessing the functioning of multi-level governance in the context of the Recovery and Resilience Agenda, the perspective of the EU regional legislative assemblies. What a complicated sentence to describe complicated things. So I hope we can have a very good input on that. And we are joined in this panel by Mrs. Bianca Martin Delgado, President of Extremadura Regional Assembly, Mr. Roberto Chambetti, President of the Regional Council of Veneto, member of the European Committee of the Regions, and Mr. Piero Mauro Zanin, President and member of the Regional Council of Friuli, Venezia Giulia, member of the European Committee of Regions as well. We have also received a video message from Mr. Gustavo Amatos Esposito, President of the Parliament of the Canary Islands and President of the Conference of European Regional Legislative Assemblies, CALRE, which have been mentioned before, and from Mr. Karl Freller, Vice President of the Bavarian State Parliament in Germany. Let us begin, please, with the first video and the President of CALRE, Mr. Matos. Please play the video.
Como presidente de CALRE, pero hoy sobre todo como presidente del Parlamento de Canarias, quiero comenzar esta intervención con un mensaje de agradecimiento a todos los parlamentos y asambleas de España y toda la Unión Europea por los muchísimos mensajes de apoyo y solidaridad que hemos recibido desde el pasado 19 de septiembre, cuando se iniciara en la isla de La Palma la crisis vulcanológica. Gracias por tantas muestras de cariño. En esta Semana Europea de las Regiones y Ciudades queremos destacar la necesidad de afrontar el proceso de reconstrucción de manera justa, sin dejar a nadie atrás y desde un trabajo perfectamente coordinado entre todos los niveles de gobierno. La experiencia nos enseña cada día que sin solidaridad y cooperación entre los Estados miembros, sus regiones y ciudades, no será posible ofrecer respuestas a los desafíos del momento actual y, sobre todo, a los futuros, que serán muchos. Debemos estar preparados. Hoy podemos decir, sin miedo a equivocarnos y sin que nos puedan tachar de temerarios, que tenemos una Europa fuerte y que cuando trabajamos de manera coordinada se puede responder con rigor, eficacia, agilidad y garantías a las demandas de cada momento. Como les decía, les hablo desde las Islas Canarias, donde la potente erupción volcánica de la isla de La Palma está causando muchísimos daños materiales, económicos y medioambientales. Este suceso, que nos tiene envueltos en una enorme incertidumbre, ha puesto a prueba a todas las instituciones locales, insulares, regionales y nacionales. En este sentido, debo destacar la rápida actuación y la coordinación que la totalidad de las administraciones están demostrando, sin importar colores políticos. Quiero hablarles de la comisión mixta que se ha creado para la reconstrucción, recuperación y apoyo a la isla de La Palma. Este órgano está integrado por los distintos niveles de gobierno, representantes del Gobierno de España, el Gobierno de Canarias, el Cabildo de La Palma y los ayuntamientos de los 3 municipios afectados. Asimismo, se ha procedido con rapidez a la apertura de una oficina única para encauzar toda la información sobre los daños, las ayudas y la situación de las propiedades y explotaciones agrícolas. Este servicio contará con 14 trabajadores sociales para comenzar a paliar la parte psicosocial de la tragedia. La respuesta de la Unión Europea también ha sido inmediata. Todo esto se traduce en algo tan esencial como confianza, la confianza de la ciudadanía en sus instituciones. Como pueden ver, tenemos aquí un claro ejemplo de la apuesta por la asociación, la solidaridad, la coordinación entre los niveles de gobierno como camino adecuado hacia la reconstrucción. Desde el inicio de la pandemia hemos escuchado en infinidad de ocasiones que de una situación tan compleja solo podríamos salir reforzados. Esto no significa otra cosa que previsión, capacidad de adelantarnos para tratar de anticipar lo que está por venir, haciéndolo mediante la adopción de medidas que nos preparen para afrontar los retos venideros y aliviar sus consecuencias. Muchas gracias.
So Mr. Motters was really stressing the importance of solidarity and the working together of all institutions on all levels. So following up this video message, it is my pleasure to give the floor now to Bianca Martin Delgado, President of Extremadura Regional Assembly. The floor is yours.
Buenos días a todos. Gracias de verdad por la amable invitación que me han realizado para participar en este importante evento. Mi más sincera enhorabuena a los miembros del Comité de las Regiones y de la Conferencia de Asambleas Legislativas Regionales de Europa por organizar este foro en el marco de la Semana Europea de las Regiones, que nos permite trasladar el sentir de los parlamentos regionales y por ende de la ciudadanía a la que representamos en torno a una cuestión clave para el futuro de todos, que es la agenda para la recuperación de la Unión Europea. Estos tiempos complejos en los que nos ha tocado vivir están repletos de incertidumbres, pero si alguna certeza nos ha dejado esta crisis global es que la respuesta a los retos, oportunidades y problemas que ha planteado debe ser coordinada, conjunta y favorable a la implicación de todos los órganos de gobernanza. Aunque esta máxima pareciese haber cobrado sentido estos días, el propio Tratado de la Unión Europea contempla de manera explícita, a través del principio de subsidiariedad, la dimensión local y regional y el necesario respeto a sus competencias. Un principio clave que en los últimos años se ha pretendido reforzar desde las instituciones como la Comisión Europea para propiciar la participación de las regiones en la construcción de la Unión Europea y favorecer una mayor comprensión de lo que se hace desde ella. En este sentido, la Declaración de Bucarest abogó por aplicar el concepto de subsidiariedad activa para que las decisiones se tomen lo más cercana a los ciudadanos. En estos momentos, si cabe, es aún más necesario que nunca. Sobre la mesa tenemos el Plan de Recuperación para Europa y dos nuevos instrumentos financieros, el Mecanismo Europeo de Recuperación y Resiliencia y la ayuda a la recuperación para la cohesión en los territorios de Europa, para afrontar y mitigar las consecuencias de la crisis provocada por la COVID-19. Si tenemos en cuenta que las entidades locales y regionales son responsables de 1/3 del gasto público y más de la mitad de la inversión pública de la Unión Europea, parece obvio que éstas tienen mucho que decir en cuanto a la gestión de estos nuevos instrumentos. Sin embargo, el propio Comité Europeo de las Regiones ya ha alertado, tras el estudio de diversos planes nacionales de recuperación y resiliencia presentados a la Comisión Europea, de que la participación de las entidades locales y regionales en la preparación de estos planes ha sido muy baja. Subrayo también que el principio de subsidiariedad se aplica de manera muy limitada y pone de relieve que la falta de participación de los entes locales y regionales podría acarrear consecuencias negativas, dado que los planes podrían ser menos eficientes y tener un menor impacto. Es, por tanto, vital que la voz de las regiones se escuche para garantizar el éxito de estos planes y, en consecuencia, contribuir a la recuperación de la Unión Europea tras esta grave crisis social, económica y sanitaria que ha provocado el coronavirus. En este sentido, quiero compartir con ustedes la experiencia del Parlamento Autonómico que tengo el honor de presidir, que es la Asamblea de Extremadura. Mi región, Extremadura, es conocedora de la importancia que para su desarrollo tienen los fondos europeos. En los últimos años, el progreso de la comunidad ha estado ligado en gran parte a Europa. En consonancia, la Asamblea de Extremadura mantiene de manera permanente desde su creación la Comisión de Asuntos Europeos, un órgano que no tienen todos los parlamentos regionales y a quien corresponde, entre otros aspectos, conocer los aspectos políticos, financieros, institucionales y normativos de Extremadura con la Unión Europea, así como la aplicación en la región de sus políticas. Conscientes de la trascendencia para el futuro de la gestión de estos fondos, el Consejo de Gobierno de la Junta de Extremadura aprobó ya en febrero de este año un decreto para establecer medidas de coordinación para la planificación, gestión y ejecución de fondos europeos, normativa que obliga al propio Ejecutivo a dar cuentas al Parlamento Autonómico sobre la situación de la programación y ejecución de los mismos. Además, la normativa aprobada con posterioridad regula ya la necesaria rendición de cuentas en este Parlamento. El Ejecutivo extremeño solicitó en junio al Parlamento la creación de un nuevo órgano, adscrito a la Comisión de Asuntos Europeos. Esta es una subcomisión para el estudio, seguimiento y control de los fondos europeos, siendo un órgano totalmente novedoso cuya finalidad es el estudio, informe, debate y control de estos fondos que recibe o recibirá Extremadura, así como garantizar una gestión transparente y equilibrada de los recursos procedentes de la Unión Europea, fondos que además trascienden a una legislativa en el régimen electoral español. Se trata, en definitiva, de hacer valer la subsidiariedad activa como herramienta esencial en la recuperación y construcción de la Unión Europea. Un aspecto este que hemos reclamado siempre desde la CALRE, quien, como saben, también alberga un grupo de trabajo permanente sobre subsidiariedad que además tuve el honor de coordinar hace 2 años. Los parlamentos regionales con poderes legislativos jugamos un rol de mediadores entre las instituciones europeas y la ciudadanía. Por ello es clave propiciar el intercambio y la escucha activa entre ambos. De ello depende en gran medida el futuro que tenemos por delante, un tiempo en el que las respuestas que demos, como decía al inicio de mi intervención, deben ser coordinadas y conjuntas. De lo contrario, estarán condenadas al fracaso. La tarea que tenemos por delante es apasionante y en ella Extremadura siempre trabajará de la mano con el resto de instituciones para avanzar hacia una Europa más equitativa, cohesionada e igualitaria. Y en este sentido, mañana en el monasterio de Yuste, en un rinconcito adorable de Europa, donde terminó sus días el emperador Carlos V, esta región le concede el premio Carlos V a la canciller alemana Angela Merkel. Somos una región con un marcado carácter europeísta histórico y ese es uno de nuestros pequeños grandes agradecimientos a los que han contribuido al fortalecimiento de este gran proyecto que es Europa. Reitero mi agradecimiento por la invitación y poder participar con vosotros desde este rincón de Europa que es Extremadura. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Delgado, for sharing with us your perspective and experience. For me, the most powerful part was when you mentioned that subsidiarity means measures are taken as close as possible to the citizens to be successful. So that was very important. Thank you very much for your input. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Roberto Chambetti, President of the Regional Council of Veneto, member of the European Committee of the Regions. And please, Mr. Chambetti, the floor is yours for 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you. I am sorry, I cannot hear him. Excuse me, there might again be a problem with the microphone. We cannot hear you. Sorry, Mr. Chambetti.
Prova. Benissimo, benissimo,
yeah.
benissimo,
Yeah.
grazie. Good morning everybody, I speak in Italian. Dicevo, ringrazio Antiegro Te che sta coordinando questo tavolo e Mark Spage che ha preceduto e che da sempre autorevole e ascoltato membro del Comitato delle Regioni. Io sono anche membro del Subsidiarity Steering Group del Comitato delle Regioni e ricordo che abbiamo ospitato a Roma l'ultima conferenza della sussidiarietà e lo ricordo con un po' di nostalgia perché sembra passato un secolo, invece era solo la fine del 2019. La crisi pandemica ci ha insegnato che efficienza, efficacia ed economicità degli interventi si ottengono operando all'interno di una direttiva generale comune che consenta però alle realtà locali una sufficiente autonomia per calibrare su misura e in base alle esigenze effettive del territorio le azioni, gli interventi necessari. Ogni territorio, come abbiamo visto, ha le sue specificità che mutano a seconda della composizione geografica, della composizione demografica, la diffusione e concentrazioni di centri urbani e paesi e via dicendo. Nel nostro Veneto abbiamo dimostrato che la realtà locale può organizzarsi e gestire al meglio applicando anche soluzioni vagliate con centri di ricerca scientifici e università non previste dalle disposizioni emanate dagli organi superiori più rigidi che in alcuni casi, appunto, per quanto riguarda il Veneto, si sono rivelate decisive. Il presidente Zaia ha preteso, quando non lo faceva nessuno in Europa, sin dai primi giorni della pandemia, di effettuare test a tappeto sulla popolazione interessata dai primi focolai, avviando così i primi studi sul tracciamento dell'epidemia e dispose innanzitutto la costituzione di ospedali dedicati esclusivamente al Covid-19 e contestualmente il potenziamento del servizio di monitoraggio e di assistenza domiciliare, facendo in modo che negli ospedali affluissero solamente i casi più gravi. In Veneto poi abbiamo sperimentato un formidabile sistema di comunicazione multilivello, grazie alle emittenti televisive locali che ogni giorno alla stessa ora in maniera sistematica il presidente della regione dava i dati dell'evoluzione della malattia e ribadiva in maniera semplice i comportamenti e le procedure da seguire, spiegava le nuove disposizioni in alcuni casi anche molto rigide applicate dalla nostra regione. L'audience televisiva e radiofonica di queste conferenze stampa della durata di 40-50 minuti è stata altissima. Siamo entrati nelle case di tutti, contestualmente abbiamo anche sviluppato un'informazione istituzionale con le forze politiche in modo da tale da far sì che ogni provvedimento, pur assunto in regime di emergenza, fosse preventivamente spiegato anche sulla base di informazioni scientifiche. Tutti gli attori politici sono sempre stati informati e in molti hanno anche segnalato problematiche nell'applicazione delle disposizioni emanate, però appunto sempre con fare positivo. Il Consiglio regionale del Veneto ha attivato in maniera estesa, attivando appunto l'operatività da remoto, sia per quanto riguarda lo svolgimento delle sedute delle commissioni e delle sedute plenarie del Consiglio. Nella fase dell'emergenza rigida del lockdown, cioè tra marzo e luglio del 2020, abbiamo tenuto ben 22 sedute consigliari plenarie con un totale di 450 votazioni e l'approvazione di 29 progetti di leggi, in alcuni casi di straordinaria importanza. La pandemia non ha sconfitto la democrazia e appunto abbiamo potuto operare e disporre in maniera efficace e efficiente con la sussidiarietà, un'arma eccezionale in questo caso, mettere in contatto i multilivelli di appunto responsabilità e di operare in maniera efficace e efficiente. Io penso che anche il Parlamento europeo possa svolgere un ruolo analogo a quello che abbiamo svolto noi nei nostri parlamenti regionali, essere cioè al servizio di una precisa gerarchia, ma disporre anche di poteri effettivi di intervento e di sindacato rispetto alla Commissione, con la quale deve porsi in dialogo senza alcuna sudditanza. Il Parlamento è il luogo della democrazia e come dobbiamo essere noi nel Comitato delle Regioni, dobbiamo essere quella trade union, quel collegamento con i territori per far sì che possiamo diventare veramente un volano della democrazia europea. Non dimentichiamo che la storia di Europa è fatta dalle città e dalle regioni e che la sussidiarietà, se coordinata con le politiche sociali di mercato, è la password per aprire la strada del nostro futuro. Grazie per l'attenzione.
Thank you, Mr. Chambetti, for stressing the importance to having the power to ensure the necessary measures are taken on the ground level in coordination with subsidiarity. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to now share with you the video message we received from Mr. Karl Freller, Vice President of the Bavarian State Parliament in Germany. Please play the video.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident Tzitzikostas, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident Gustavo Matos Exposito, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Wir alle sind erleichtert, dass sich die Corona-Krise in Europa etwas entspannt hat, wenngleich die Krise noch nicht überstanden ist und die Impfquote in Europa und weltweit weiter steigen muss. Dabei wird wiederum deutlich, dass Corona immer noch ein globales Problem ist, das wir in Europa und der Welt gemeinsam angehen müssen. Eine engere grenzüberschreitende Zusammenarbeit, gerade mit unseren direkten Nachbarn, und Koordinierung im Gesundheitsbereich befürworte ich daher ausdrücklich. Doch auch in zahlreichen anderen Bereichen ist es wichtiger denn je, dass die Europäische Union gemeinsam handelt und mit einer Stimme spricht. Zu nennen sind dabei insbesondere Themen wie Digitalisierung, Klima, Energiepolitik, außen- und verteidigungspolitische Entscheidungen, Migration sowie ein gemeinsames Vorgehen gegen internationale Kriminalität und terroristische Aktivitäten. Um diesen Themen und ihrer globalen Tragweite gerecht zu werden, ist es notwendig, dass die Europäische Union, die Mitgliedstaaten, die Städte und Regionen und ihre politisch Verantwortlichen gemeinsam europäische Politik betreiben und diese den Bürgerinnen und Bürgern verständlich vermitteln. Der Bayerische Landtag begrüßt diese konstruktive Zusammenarbeit der verschiedenen Ebenen und setzt sich seit langem für eine stärkere Einbindung auch der regionalen und lokalen Ebene in der Europäischen Union ein. So wirkte der Bayerische Landtag entscheidend mit, dass am 1. Februar 2021 die Erklärung der 4. Europakonferenz der Präsidentinnen und Präsidenten der deutschen und österreichischen Landesparlamente und des Südtiroler Landtages unter Beteiligung des Parlaments der deutschsprachigen Gemeinschaft Belgiens gerade auch die stärkere Einbindung der Regionalparlamente in europäische Entscheidungsprozesse in den Fokus nahm. Zudem beteiligte sich der Bayerische Landtag mit 8 Plenarbeschlüssen an dem ADR- und CALRE-Pilotprojekt Input aus politischen Debatten in Regionalparlamenten und ließ so die Chance nicht ungenutzt, als Regionalparlament seinen Standpunkt und damit bayerische Anliegen in das Kommissionsarbeitsprogramm 2022 aktiv einzubringen. Letztlich vertritt die Präsidentin des Bayerischen Landtages, Frau Ilse Aigner, die deutschen Landesparlamente in der Konferenz der Zukunft Europas und setzt sich damit für mehr Mitgestaltungsmöglichkeiten der Regionalparlamente in der europäischen Politik ein. Die deutschsprachigen Landesparlamente in der EU repräsentieren beinahe 100 Millionen Menschen. Sie stehen als Mittler der Idee Europas im Dialog mit den Bürgerinnen und Bürgern vor Ort und nehmen so eine zentrale Rolle im Mehrebenensystem der Europäischen Union ein. Der Wiederaufbau nach der Corona-Pandemie und die zukünftige Gestaltung der Europäischen Union kann nur dann im Sinne der Bürgerinnen und Bürger gelingen, wenn die regionale Ebene stärker eingebunden ist. Der Corona-Wiederaufbaufonds ist dabei gerade Ausdruck des Zusammenhalts und der grenzüberschreitenden Solidarität in Europa. Aber genauso ist damit eine große Verantwortung gegenüber den jungen Menschen in Europa verbunden. Da die Europäische Union mit diesem Wiederaufbaufonds immense Geldsummen zur Verfügung stellt, muss nicht nur mit Blick auf unsere junge Generation genau darauf geachtet werden, dass die Gelder sachgerecht und zukunftsorientiert eingesetzt und rechtsstaatliche Standards eingehalten werden. Bei der Umsetzung sind alle Ebenen einzubinden, wobei vor allem der regionalen und lokalen Ebene eine zentrale Rolle zukommt. Denn um den regionalen Unterschieden und tatsächlichen Bedarfen der Bürgerinnen und Bürger effizient zu begegnen, sind die Erfahrungswerte und Kompetenzen vor Ort besonders wichtig. Damit die Mitgliedstaaten und Regionen selbst effektiv entscheiden und agieren können, müssen ihnen die Kompetenzen erhalten bleiben, für die eine Regelung auf EU-Ebene keinen Mehrwert verspricht. Der Grundsatz der Subsidiarität ist daher für ein bürgernahes Europa besonders wichtig. Denn nur wenn die Bürgerinnen und Bürger aktiv an europapolitischen Fragen beteiligt werden und selbst im Sinne einer aktiven Subsidiarität die europäische Idee mitgestalten können, werden sie der Europäischen Union das Vertrauen entgegenbringen, das gerade in und nach Krisenzeiten für den Wiederaufbau unerlässlich ist. Ich bedanke mich.
So far, the statement of Mr. Freller, Vice President of the Bavarian State Parliament. I would now like to welcome Mr. Piero Moro-Zanin, President of the Regional Council of Friuli Venezia Giulia, member of the European Committee of the Regions, and our CVEX rapporteur on better regulation. So, Mr. Zanin, you have the floor for 3 to 5 minutes, please.
Grazie Vicepresidente Groter, un saluto al Presidente Matos.
For 3 to 5 minutes, please.
Grazie Vicepresidente Groter, grazie Presidente Matos. Il problema del governo multilivello è uno dei problemi con i quali nel futuro l'Unione Europea dovrà sicuramente confrontarsi. Nella mia regione, il Friuli Venezia Giulia, una piccola regione a nord-est dell'Italia, abbiamo attivato tutta una serie di iniziative volte alla massima partecipazione di portatori di interesse ai processi decisionali sulla attività legislativa della nostra regione. Una prima iniziativa si è tenuta recentemente, il 22 settembre, quando il presidente Tzitzikostas è venuto a visitare l'Assemblea legislativa del Friuli Venezia Giulia e in quell'occasione abbiamo dato il via a una prima rete di amministratori locali under 40 che si sono potuti confrontare con il presidente Tzitzikostas su qual è la loro visione della Unione Europea del futuro, per portare la voce di giovani ma che sono già impegnati nell'amministrazione degli enti locali all'interno della Convenzione sul futuro dell'Europa. Questa è una rete che noi cercheremo di mantenere stabili per stringere sempre di più i rapporti tra l'Assemblea legislativa e le piccole e medie realtà amministrative locali dove trovano spazio alcuni giovani che portano il loro contributo. L'altra azione concreta che è stata attivata dall'Assemblea legislativa Friuli Giulia è stato il tavolo della terza ripartenza. Terza ripartenza perché il Friuli ha avuto due momenti nella storia recente di distruzione, il primo quello a seguito della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, essendo stata in qualche modo luogo di scontri violenti, e il secondo dopo il terremoto del 1976 che ha distrutto quasi l'intera regione, portando circa 1000 morti. Noi abbiamo ritenuto che anche il Covid sia in qualche modo un momento di ripensamento complessivo del modello di sviluppo e abbiamo attivato questo tavolo appunto della terza ripartenza che vede seduti attorno sia amministratori locali, legislatori, ma anche industriali, sindacalisti, mondo della ricerca, mondo delle associazioni, cioè abbiamo fatto in modo che ci fosse una riflessione complessiva di tutte le energie locali della nostra regione finalizzata a interpretare attraverso progetti concreti le linee previste dal Piano Nazionale di Ripresa e Resilienza, per fare in modo che le risposte sul territorio siano quelle di cui il territorio realmente abbia necessità, con un approccio dal basso verso l'alto che è sinonimo di efficienza e di efficacia degli interventi, rispetto invece a interventi che magari vengono calati dai governi centrali. Questo documento, nonostante il nostro Stato abbia avuto un approccio molto sistemico, centralizzato della programmazione del Piano Nazionale di Ripresa e Resilienza, per quanto poi riguarda la loro attuazione, troverà in questo tavolo diciamo, un interlocutore capace, un interlocutore concreto di quelle che sono le esigenze del tessuto della nostra regione rispetto alla ripresa post-Covid, attraverso interventi che utilizzano le risorse europee, ma siano risorse finalizzate a un beneficio concreto, immediato e oggettivo dello sviluppo regionale, intervenendo principalmente su alcuni aspetti di cui non mi dilungo, ma per studiare anche attraverso la proposta dei giovani un nuovo modello di sviluppo che non può essere il modello dell'aumento del prodotto interno lordo, ma deve essere in qualche modo anche un progetto che parta su uno sviluppo che posi le basi sullo sviluppo sostenibile, cioè su uno sviluppo economico che sia integrato con la tutela ambientale e con la tutela dei diritti sociali per le nostre comunità. È chiaro che, ecco, rispetto a questo, un altro sforzo importante per rendere più democratica l'Europa è quello appunto di sentire le comunità locali attraverso il potenziamento della voce del Comitato delle Regioni nelle istituzioni europee. E questo deve essere fatto anche attraverso un coordinamento dell'attività delle assemblee regionali con poteri legislativi rappresentati dalla Camera, perché viene richiesto, e noi in Regione lo stiamo facendo, uno sforzo su un intervento di sviluppo che non sia solo economico ma anche legislativo, cioè necessita accompagnare questo nuovo modello di sviluppo anche una serie di riforme legislative che siano diciamo, coerenti con questi investimenti e con questo di sviluppo. Per fare questo abbiamo anche la necessità che queste leggi di riforma siano fatte bene, siano basate su principi comuni di tutte le comunità che fanno parte delle regioni, sulla better regulation, quindi criteri di semplificazione, sburocratizzazione e adesione il più possibile agli obiettivi che la legge deve avere per renderla in qualche modo efficiente ed efficace nella fase di positiva attuazione. Molti buoni propositi, molti buoni progetti che nascono dal territorio poi vengono vanificati da una legislazione difficilmente attuabile, farraginosa, complicata, che spreca parte delle risorse solo per un'azione di autoreferenzialità. E proprio in questo senso credo che insomma, ecco, un processo dal basso anche di capacità di migliore legislazione, così come ho avuto modo anche di dire al presidente Van Rompuy in un incontro di qualche giorno fa, penso che sia una delle basi sulla quale la conferenza sul futuro dell'Europa deve impegnarsi proprio per rendere più efficiente ed efficace il governo multilivello, perché altrimenti la capacità di interagire tra livelli di governo diversi viene vanificata dalla complicazione dell'applicazione della legge. Quindi credo sia uno degli strumenti fondamentali del futuro dell'Europa e anche della capacità di governo multilivello, la bontà legislativa, la semplificazione legislativa e far sì che queste semplificazioni siano comuni alle comunità di tutta Europa attraverso quella prospettiva che insomma credo sia vincente, che sarà costruire un'Europa non più degli Stati ma un'Europa delle regioni e delle comunità. Grazie Vicepresidente Grotter, grazie a tutti i colleghi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zanin. What was the most important for me was that you stressed the importance of involvement of the youth, because we have to make sure that they are kept within our decision-making, within all our decision-making on every level of government, and always taken into consideration what is best for our youth. Thank you so much. Dear participants, I am sorry, we're running out of time and I don't think it is possible to have any questions. And as I suggested earlier, when we started with this part of the panel, I would love to have another discussion about that and on another occasion. But for now, I think it's only possible for me to do the Slido question for the audience to just at least get you in touch a bit with our sayings from today. So please do now the Slido, which is just there on the screen. And it is about what do you consider as the main obstacle to the functioning of multi-level governance and effective implementation of active subsidiarity? A, top-down control of national governments. B, insufficient capacity building measures for regional authorities, which would equip them with the expertise to participate in the design and implementation of recovery plans. Or C, limited involvement of non-governmental actors. So as I see for now, the people taking part, which are just a few, are almost all very, very, very much in favor of the top-down control of national governments as a main obstacle to the functioning of multi-level governance. Okay, so I don't want to exceed the time, so therefore I would just stop the slide now and say that we have a problem, maybe an obstacle with the functioning of multi-level governance when we have a top-down control of national governments. And we may have to make sure that this all is working in the system of subsidiarity, but with regard to our national competences. And I would now just hand over, after again, thank you very much to the participants and all the people presenting their views. I would now hand over the microphone back to Mr. Speich for the closing remarks. So thank you very much, you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gautier, for chairing this very inspiring debate. And well, I think we all have been faced by time pressure with this debate, and it could go on for a while. And I'm very sorry for that, but it will be continued. I have now the honor of concluding our workshop, and I would like to thank the speakers, both those who are with us in person and those who have sent us their insights via videos. I'm very delighted about the participation in this workshop. It shows that the issues of subsidiarity and multi-level governance are not just abstract concepts, but they have a very important meaning to everyday political life, and that there are a lot of challenges ahead of us. And there have been some very critical remarks as well. And I think it is now up to us, well, to work with those critical comments and to work on improving the participation of regions, of local municipalities, to improve the concept of active subsidiarity. And it's not just a question of instruments and architecture, it's also a question of political will. And I think that's something that also is in the responsibility of all of us to improve. So I am very grateful for those insights. I'm very grateful for the participation. And as I'm sitting across Mr. Chambetti, I would also like to thank for the strong Italian contribution to that workshop. That is highly appreciated. Thank you so much. For your information, you will find all the reference documents and the recording of this workshop on our Committee of the Regions website. And the link to that page is in the chat. So I look forward to continuing this debate, and I wish you all a good day, and thank you so much. Goodbye.